Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Chatto. I am part of the marketing team for an amazing ministry called Planting Roots, and this is the Planting Roots podcast. I'm so excited to welcome Kori Yates onto the podcast today. She is the executive director of our wonderful ministry. Welcome, Kori. We're so excited to have you today.
I am super excited to be here and excited about our conversation.
I'm thrilled. This is going to be so much fun. So this is all part of the Invitation Project. And before we things off, because you were part of this author group collective and writing this incredible Bible study that releases in May, why did we focus on one unifying project for 2026? And can you tell us just a little bit more about the Invitation Project in general?
Well, the Invitation Project is our theme for the whole year, which I am super excited about. We found we used to do themes for an entire year, and then we stopped because it felt confining at times, and we've gotten to where we felt more disjointed. And so, having one unifying direction for all the parts of Planning Roots to go, whether it's a print product or a podcast or a social media or our community app, any of those pieces all are moving the same direction. And um, especially as we started talking last year about this idea of the invitation and the understanding that probably the most valuable thing we possess other than Jesus is that invitation and the one we extend to others, and we know how that feels when it's extended to us, and challenging us to extend that invitation to offer hospitality in places just like Jesus did. And so the idea of going into this was that we would challenge ourselves as much as we challenge others to invite people into community, into our lives, but most of all into a relationship with Jesus.
Oh, I love that. The intentionality of inviting people into our lives and seeing someone being like, please come join me in this journey as
Yeah,
we both decide to glorify God and we're running our respective races. I think there's something so lovely about like just doing life together. I love that. So
it is. I think it's valuable.
oh, absolutely.
Super.
Yes. So in creating this invitation project, we have multiple authors who contributed different chapters to this. And your chapter is themed on the concept of moving, changing places, PCSing, which is a for sure. It is a given with military life is that there is constant change, constant movement, constant like the only constant is everything is not constant.
That's right.
Okay. In your chapter, one of the things that you described yourself as and your family as kind of odd ducks in a specific community. And so, how did that shape the way you initially approached church and relationships?
It was a weird duty station to begin with, and I called us odd ducks because my husband was going to school like civilian school, like back to university kind of thing, and so we were in a place that was like we were in Deep East Texas, which is where he got his bachelor's degree also, but we ended up in a place where there's not a military installation around. Like the only military that these people knew were the recruiters in town, and they didn't really know them. They just saw the buildings as they drove down the main drag, right? Because there's always recruiters by a university. It's just how it works. But so they knew of them, and then they may have known somebody in the National Guard or like a veteran from a previous war or something like that. They did not necessarily know another active duty family. And so the idea that we would move there, and we moved there from Georgia, and we were there for about a year and a half, and then we moved to Kansas, and that was very foreign to them, to a lot of them, the fact that we move so frequently. So it was different. The duty station itself was one it was where my husband and I met to begin with. So going back with 2 kids and we're married and all the things. That threw us off a little bit. We thought it would be the same, and it wasn't. We didn't even go to the same church. We still knew all the people we knew, but our friend groups were different. Our church was different. Those kinds of things. But going to church and finding the church that we belonged to was interesting, because we knew we'd only be there for a short time, so we wanted to step in as fast as we could. And this church in particular really embraced us in that they had a newcomers thing. You know how they do, like right after worship service or whatever. You can like meet the pastors and learn more about the church or whatever. Anyway, we went to one of those, and they had us fill out like this little form with all of our contact information and our favorite things. And if one of the ministers, did not show up at our door with our favorite drinks. Like he had chocolate milk in one hand and a Mountain Dew in the other. So both mine and my husband's favorite drinks, and he showed up at our door, and he's like, "We're so excited to have you," and that's very unusual for them to, like, come to our door, but a small town, East Texas, so, whatever. But we got to talking to him, and he found a way after, like, just having conversation, building a relationship with us, he found exactly the right place for us to be able to plug in. That wasn't it wasn't just volunteering in the nursery or, bringing brownies or watching 10 kids at the next vacation Bible school. He found a place that we could plug in with the gifts that we had and do that for the time that we were there. And so, um, as much as we were kind of odd and weird, they really embraced that and had all the questions. So it became this lovely kind of relationship between us and them.
Oh, there's so many points that you brought up that I'm like, "Ugh, I just wanna dig into this really quick." But one of them that I love that you said is just this idea of inviting yourself to be open-minded to a situation where you're like, "We were here, and it looked
Mm,
like A, B, and C, but now we're here, and it looks like D, E, and F." And you're just like, "Oh,
right.
that's an adjustment." And that doesn't mean that it's bad, because I've always thought that too. I've had what in my mind, this rosy retrospection, like, for me, when I was stationed in South Korea where we met,
Mhm.
like, that was flawless. It was absolutely flawed, but in my head, it could do no wrong. Like, Korea was the perfect duty station, and I had, like, the most spiritual growth. I had amazing friendships, all these things, and so sometimes I romanticize in my head, "Well, let's just go back to Korea." Like, Korea was so great, and it is great, don't get me wrong, but
It
in a
is.
moment you're thinking like, it's not going to be the same. The same people aren't there. God intentionally wove those people in that chapter for this reason. If he
That's
sent you
right.
back again, it would be for a different chapter, a different season for different people. And so it's inviting this idea of like accepting where you're at during that time, but also managing expectations so that it's not about you, but it's about God instead.
It is, and finding your place in those places. One of the things we talk about in the chapter, and it's called "On Mission Wherever You Go," but we actually go back and look at the Israelites in Babylon and their exile, and the fact that God didn't tell them to hunker down and build their own clan and just survive till the next thing or whatever. He told them to live there. I mean, they're in exile in this foreign land, like hundreds and hundreds, like they were drugged there, like they walked. They didn't get on the little train or the bus and ride there, and they went all the way there because of disobedience. God was trying to bring them back, but they went there and they could have just, like, stuck to themselves. They could have, like, just been the Israelites over here and then the rest of Babylon somewhere else, right? And God was like, "That's not what I want. I want you to live in that place. I want you to live and prosper and grow your families and, have businesses and do all of those things." And it's a great reminder for us that every place we go is different, and even if we repeat duty stations, which we've only done once, it's not the same when we go back because situations are different, people are different, and God calls us to different things in different seasons. But His goal and His heart is that we live in those places.
The intentionality of choosing to live and to prosper, not
Mhm.
just to be like, I'm just gonna sit back and let the 2 years, 3 years just go by. Like, no, he does. I love that idea of you're called to live, and that's have businesses, do life, every all these aspects, not just let, like, life pass you by.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
I love the example of the pastor bringing your favorite drinks to your door. Very unconventional, very fun. That's such a unique way to connect, and I think that actually transitions so well because that's very extroverted. But in the chapter, you talk about being introverts, and so what did it
Mhm.
cost you to intentionally build community, knowing that your time there was limited, and also being like, this might not naturally be, so, or at least something that comes naturally to me.
Well, it's always a challenge. We're introverts by nature. So every place it's like, I swear someday I'm going to like have a shirt that says, I hope they like me. And I'm just going to wear it to all the new places, every place I go. Because it's like, dear Jesus, it is not, it doesn't come naturally. It's not like, oh, it's my favorite thing to walk into this room with all these people I don't know. But at church, we knew it was our third duty station married together because we were both active duty before that, and so we had done other things, but it was our third one together, and, we had come from a very strong church who had cared for us and loved us in our small group, which is where we thrive the most. If all we do is go to worship service, we never We never make it because we will never make the connections that we long for. And the small group is the place where we do that, where we start to have conversation with people, where we talk about life together. And so we found that. We found our small group. They had kids, a lot of them have kids now. Most of them were from that area, like they'd only lived there in that area for their life. They'd never lived anywhere else, but their kids became friends with our kids, and it just became this little community, that just cared for us in that place, but something we would not have had if we had not chosen to go to a small group and just put just jumped into those places and put ourselves in there. So I think it's valuable for us to kind of know what that looks like for us. I mean, as an extrovert, you may be able to go into the sanctuary and just like, or worship service and be able to meet all the people, but that doesn't work for us.
No, thank you so much for sharing. My next question is kind of this idea of, again, constant change, constant movement in the military. And the beautiful yet difficult aspect of that is that you spend anywhere from months, weeks, years building this community. And then you finally get to your final Sunday and you're knowing, like, hey, I'm going to be transitioning to a new community, having to find a new church home. Um, Stepping out again, fighting introverted tendencies. So how do you view your role when you start to go into each new assignment with that in mind?
Well, it's changed, and that church in East Texas is what changed our perspective. Because before that, we would go to places and look for that community. We were praying about the neighbors we'd have next door, and the people we would meet at church, and the people we would interact with, whether at work or the kids' school, or all of those kinds of places. But going there, it was that changed our perspective because as we left there in those last couple of weeks, the conversation we had and the last Sunday that we were there with them, their perspective of us was that they were sending us off, that they were commissioning us as missionaries to go to the next place, which was so weird to me because I'm like, we're only going to Kansas, it's not like it's not like we're going any place. Like I wasn't even super excited about Kansas. You know what I mean? I love it now, and I love Kansas and all the people in Kansas, and they're wonderful. But then I was like, "We're going to Kansas," like, in January when it's, like, freezing cold and we're gonna be there less than a year. So, it was really hard for us to see that, but, um, but for them to see that in us and to see the opportunities we would have as a military family as we went from place to place, if they poured into us, our ability, excuse me, to pour into others in all of these places as we go, um, was a gift to us because it's not something we had seen in ourselves.
So going along with that, in your writing, I believe you said something along the lines of, "We saw ourselves as trying to belong, but they saw us as missionaries," which
That's right.
beautiful concept. I love that. But why do you think that military families are almost at risk for missing that identity and having that perspective of an entire church community being like, "Oh, you're missionaries," and we're like, "We're just going to Kansas. I'm just going to New Mexico. Like, what are you talking about?"
Well, I think part of it is because we just do the next thing. You get orders and then you go do it becomes part of this is just what we do. This is our life and trying to connect that with God's intentionality in that. And so our next duty station, we actually started talking about Cal's orders, which, since I wasn't on active duty anymore and we were stateside, that means his name was the only ones on there. And so it felt really strange because I'm like, well, we're just kind of following him, or, it's just where the army sends us. But to change our perspective and to be able to shift it and see that God was sending us somewhere. And then to connect dots years ago, back when I was in high school, one of the things I longed for most was to be a foreign missionary. I thought I'm going to go to the mission field and it's going to be super awesome and it's going to be great, and I have, but just not in the way I thought I was going to. I thought I'd, like, go to seminary or something, and then they'd send me for a whole lifetime in like the middle of Africa or something. And instead, God put us in military life and has moved us on 3 continents and, 12 different houses and all of these places, in our lifetime. And so the shift on that third duty station that God says, I am sending you someplace, the army's not sending you, you're not even necessarily choosing to go, those orders are mine and I have a purpose and a plan for you. And when our family shifted our focus to where we went looking for God's purpose for us in those places, it changed how we moved and it changed and all the emotions that came with it. Still some grief every time we move, but when we go looking, we there's less of the I long for the things I left behind or I'm wishing for the next thing. We go looking and then we end up living in the place where we are.
Oh, I love that. I just, like, wanna relish in that little phrasing for a second. That's oh, I think that is something that we're so at risk of doing is just missing life.
Mm,
I remember when I was stationed in Florida, again, grieving my circumstances because I had to move, and it was a very rapid military move, and I was upset, all kinds of
mm.
upset. And I remember God leaning into me and just being like, like, "You're kinda wallowing a bit, yet I've equipped you and you're doing all these things, and people see that you're doing all these things, and I'm a single mom," and he's just like, "People are seeing you accomplish things that they can't believe that they doubt that they could do, and here you are doubting it." And I was doing it. I was doing things. I was living life, but I was, like, so upset while I was doing it. So he's like, "You're literally missing all the things you're accomplishing because 'cause you're just so upset." And it was very humbling for me in that moment where he was just like, "You're gonna get it done regardless, so we could do it where you're leaning into me and trusting the process, or you could just be upset the whole time." So I love that idea of just, like, living intentionally in that moment. I
It can
also
be hard.
Yes. Yes, that is not to take away that, like, as Christians, like, we're not promised an easy life. It's probably gonna
That's
be
right.
incredibly difficult, and so I think it was good. It was a little bit of humble pie for me in that moment.
Spiritual growth opportunities.
Exactly, spiritual growth, some testimony building.
That's right.
Um, I also loved how you were saying that at points in your life, you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna be a foreign missionary." And
Mm,
what kind of sat with me as you were sharing that was I believe it's still statistically true, but less than 1% of the US population has any affiliation with the military. So, like
that's
like
right.
you had started the podcast episode saying, like, they might know someone in the Guard, they might know a veteran, like, the stat is so sparse now that they might not even know those people. Like, a child seeing someone going to their local grocery store in a military uniform, that might be the only person that they've seen, like, in real life as a military representative. And so, I think there's so much goodness in that idea that, like, you kind of are a foreign missionary. For people, it's foreign to you combined with you're going to communities where people are not familiar with that life, both of you having chosen to serve at different points in your lives, choosing to uproot your family, sacrificing the type of loyalty and commitment that comes with it, and just flexibility. Like, to them, they're just like, wow, that is a lot to be like, sign me up. Let me do this. And so I think that there's something beautiful in that too, where God's like, "It's not gonna be the way you thought it was, but it's still a foreign assignment." I
It is, and the more I've thought about our military culture, if you flip those statistics around, there's actually about 250,000 Bible believing, Christ following military women. So women and wives, in our military community that are Christ followers that are seeking after God, that are digging into scripture, that are doing those things on a regular basis. And if you in the grand scheme of things, if you look at how many there are based on like the number of people in the United States, right? It is a super small percentage. But if you look at it in the fact that you take any denomination in the United States and look at how many foreign missionaries they have or how many missionaries they send out, and that's more than any of them in any given year. And so you think about it, and if all of those women are just doing what God called them to in the place where they are, then we together collectively become the greatest missionary movement of our time. You know, we become what these denominations are paying millions and millions of dollars to do simply because we're being obedient to Christ. And that opportunity is well, it's one of the reasons we started planting roots. So there's that. But it's one that you don't want to miss. And whether you're in Kansas, Deep East Texas, you end up in Korea, Germany, wherever you end up, there's an opportunity to share the gospel with people. And sometimes those people wear a uniform and sometimes they don't. And sometimes they speak your language and sometimes they don't. Um, but it's still an opportunity and God has a purpose for all of us in those places. And as much as we think it's some big thing, it's not. It's just being obedient in today.
So, in that obedience,
Mhm.
how can we reframe that mindset and avoid exhaustion with constantly moving and the constant change that comes with military life and almost part of that reframing, see it as a mission field? Like, how do you, what has worked for you and what do you recommend for others?
The biggest thing that's worked for our family is revisiting God's faithfulness in all of the places. When our kids were super young, so the first time our oldest recognized we were moving, she was about 3, and it was that move from Georgia to Texas. It was move number 2, and she was trying to comprehend that we were like these sweet little friends of yours at church, like we don't get to see them next week, right? And it just didn't make sense. But we gave her a disposable camera and so as we packed out our house, as we, went to did all the last time we went to church or the last time we went to Kyle's unit or the last time we did whatever, she just took pictures of random things. We also got the pictures of 70 miles an hour down the interstate, on the way to Texas, which is like this blur out the window. And then she took pictures of our new house, of the playground where we went to play while we were looking for houses, of the boxes as we moved in, and then we took those pictures and made it and put them in a little scrapbook, and we called it our moving scrapbook. And every move since then, we have done the same thing. Now they do it with their phones, and we just upload them and order the hard copies. But we add to their moving scrapbook. Well, she completed it. She said, "We moved to Florida, and then she went to college, and she's like, I have to start a new one now because it's a new life, mom." But that that scrapbook, what it did for us is allowed us to look back at God's faithfulness in all of those places of the people and the homes and the neighbors and, the communities and the churches, all of these things that God had provided in every single place that we went. And so every time we look back at those things, it gave us courage and joy to do the next thing because there was this anticipation of look at look what we would have missed if we hadn't gone to Georgia. Look what we would have missed if we hadn't ever gone to Kansas. Look what we would have missed if we've never been to Maryland. And so it made our kids look forward and made us look forward to, okay, well, who do we meet in the next place? And what does community look like there? And what does our church look like? And so it almost became like this treasure hunt. As we went to the next place. But the visual, the actual tangible pieces of the pictures and the stickers and all the things, as they put them in their scrapbooks, it was really a great way for the kids to process God's faithfulness and then for us to have a track record of God's faithfulness in their lives. So hopefully when we send them off to college or we send them off to do life, wherever it is after living at our house, they can go back and, in those hard seasons of life and say, but God was faithful in every season, in every place, with every community that we went to.
Corey, you're just such a light. I love this. For anyone listening, you're going to Germany in a couple months, in a month or something, to speak at an
Mhm.
event, right? So if you love everything that she's saying, like I'm eating this up with 2 spoons. I know you are too. You can invite Corey from Planting Roots to come to speak to your PWC, your chapel team, your church. I would have loved. I mean, I think that's something that I learned throughout my military career, but I would have loved as a baby lieutenant back at Malmstrom Air Force Base up in Montana to have had someone say like, "Hey, this is a way of reframing this." And that actually kind of transitions into our next question. Like, what shifts when the focus moves from finding our people and us being poured into instead and then shifting that into being sent to people?
I think it makes us more intentional about what we choose and what we don't choose, to do with our time, which is probably the biggest piece that it's done for us. And we have I'm gonna tell you all of our things, and so Lord help you. But we have this, like, 3 to 6 month rule at our house. So when we move to a new place, we do not make a commitment. If it's overseas, it's 6 months. If it's CONUS, it's 3 months. But anyway, I'm sure all the details matter to you. My husband and I live in this like black and white world where everything's structured. But we have this rule, and within that period of time, we don't sign up for anything. We don't volunteer for anything that's long term. We'll step in and like bring brownies to something, or we'll, help in the nursery or something. We'll do these kind of one off things, but we don't make a long term commitment until that period. And the idea is that we go and we see what God's doing in those places, and then figure out where we're supposed to be involved in that. Because what we found in the first couple of duty stations is we would step into all the things, and then we find out about 6 or 8 months in that, okay, number 1, it was a lot because, like, Lord help me, I can't hold my hand down for the life of me. Um, but the second is that we ended up in places that were not life-giving. They were not places that we were supposed to be in, and so they weren't filling us. We weren't we weren't really filling anybody else. It wasn't helpful for anybody because it was we were just filling a hole. We were not being intentional about how we use our time and what we step into. So that's probably the biggest thing when our mindset shifted, is that we started to kind of build those boundaries that said, okay, we're gonna go looking for what God's doing in those places, and then together we're going to be intentional about what we choose to do with our time, both as individuals and as families. And then the other thing we did is, we actually have it's in my nightstand upstairs, but it's this piece of paper that is basically what we feel like God has called us to, and there are 3 columns on it. And so there's Kyle's column and my column, and then our column as a family. And so there's no more than 3 things in anybody's column in any one of the 3. But the idea is that these are the things that we believe God has called us to. And, in big picture, like, we believe God called us to homeschool. It is what our family does, right? And so when we start looking at what we're going to do with our time, or how we're going to step into places, or what God might be calling us to, we go back to that piece of paper and say, okay, these are the things, big umbrella, that we feel that God has called us to. If we're going to commit long term, do they line up with this? If they do, then, okay. If there's a space and we feel like that's the direction. If they don't, it's something we have to take back to the Lord and say, okay, we feel like we're supposed to go here, but it doesn't line up with what we felt like you told us over here. So, give us some clarity on which is the right answer.
So if y'all are listening just to the podcast, you need to go to the YouTube because I silence myself so that our speakers, our guests can have the most amplified like talking and that you get like the most delicious sound bites and can just absorb everything that they're saying. But I'm like nodding, I'm snapping, I'm like, yes, Corey. Preach, yes. So you're just gonna have to watch on YouTube for all my reactions because I wholeheartedly agree. The first thing that came to mind is goodness, yes to healthy boundaries. And I
Yeah.
think like many of us, and I know it's a generalization, but it's still true. It like women often struggle with that because you're just like, I want to give, I want to love well. Put me in coach, I can do this thing. And I know
Or I
I
just want to belong, like, I want to
yeah,
belong somewhere. Yes.
absolutely, 100%. And so, but I love that because I think I've kind of learned something similarly to you, where almost in every single one of my duty stations, like clockwork. So it's probably a pattern that God's like working on me and I have failed. But I will usually be in a church community for about a year. And I kind of similarly to you, I don't volunteer for anything right off the bat. I'm kind of like feeling it out, making sure, but usually something has got me excited about the community. And that's not critiquing any church or anything. It's just like, yeah, like this, I'm vibing with this. I like this environment. Let's check it out. And at some point, I'll volunteer because I also adamantly believe that if you want to provide critiques, you need to be in the body too, working and volunteering.
Right.
So I'm doing that as well, and a year will hit, and despite all my intentionality and whatever I put forth, I feel like I'm like, wow, I really don't know people well, and I'm lacking something. And so then I kind of like reflect on like what I've done so far and have like, is it a me problem? Have I not done enough? Have I not been committed enough? And then like clockwork, one of my friends will invite me to a different church community. And because I'm feeling questionable about where I'm at, I'll go check something out. And goodness, that next community is like almost like God's like, I wanted you to test out living in this new place for a bit, but actually this one is the community, this next one. And literally every single place it's like that.
Wow.
So it happened in
It's
you
a pattern.
and yeah. And so yeah, I think it's just one of those two where um, it's word of mouth. You're introduced to the first thing that's popular that people are like, "Yeah, I go here," or whatever. But as you're trying to figure out like, "Oh, where is God calling me to?" Like, you're gonna meet people, you're gonna figure out the community. There's a lot of grace in that. But then I think when God, at least in my life, is like, "All right, hop on the bus, we got stuff to do." Then he's like, "Let's move on to the church community." But I
That's
love
right.
that. I think that's such a good example to set about like, here's our columns, here's our boundaries, this is what we're doing. And that it also gives you the freedom to love people well because you're not overcommitting, overexerting, living in a state of exhaustion. Because arguably, when you are pouring from an empty cup or you're just serving exhausted, you're not your best self. And anyone, no one's to blame. Like when you're serving from that posture, either heart posture or head posture, you're not your best self. So you don't know what's going to happen. And God doesn't want you to serve exhausted or to live life exhausted. He wants you to be rested. He wants you to be intentional. And so I just love that. That was so much goodness. Thank you for sharing, Corey. But with that, I think you kind of talked a little bit about with columns, but just in case you wanted to um, lean into this more, is there anything that your family did too in terms of discerning who God may be inviting you to invest in more deeply in these relationships in these church communities, especially after those periods of time where you're like, okay, it is now time to engage. It's now time to be more committed to this community.
There are, but sometimes it hasn't looked like we expected. Um, we go in thinking, okay, well, we have these gifts and we have these skills, and this is where we're going to pour into these places. But sometimes it hasn't looked like that. And I'll give you a couple of examples. When we moved to Kansas, we found our church home. We ended up in the chapel. We were going to be there less than a year. So it was a great place for us to land. And we loved it, and it was wonderful. But one of the ladies at chapel, at Protestant Women of the Chapel at Bible study or whatever. She came up to me one day and, I had seen her in passing. Her husband was retired. So, they live there. And anyway, they're just, all those sweet ladies who just love on all the people. And so I knew her, but she walked up to me one day and she said, "You need a mentor." And I'm it. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so sure enough, she started coming over to my house every week. She'd just like show up on the door. Kyle was deployed at the time and she would see what kids were doing and she would see whatever, what is my house clean? Did you like feed your children? Are they eating cereal? She'd just show up. And so there are people that have stepped into my life that I might not have gone and said, "Okay, I want to invest in them," or I feel like this relationship is one of them. So sometimes they've stepped into us. Um, and then one time when we were in Maryland, we looked for almost 6 months for a church home, and I felt like we visited like every church within our belief system. Like we didn't step out of that, but we visited like a whole boatload of them. Um, and it was the weirdest thing. We ended up in the chapel on base, and um, it we had 2 small kids, right? They didn't have Sunday school. There was not a children's program, there was not whatever, and we went first there when we first got there, and then, months later as we had visited other churches, and my husband and I looked at each other and we're like, "We feel like we're supposed to be here, but, like, this is not what we were looking for." And so when we started praying about it, God was like, "You're looking for programs, you're not looking for me." And, we were like, "Okay." So we became part of that church, and the weird thing is we were not, like, part of that church. Like, we could be gone, like, 3 weeks and, like, nobody would know. Like, they just didn't, right? It was not like we had this great community that we just really it was not that church. But, in that time, at Kyle's job, and he was in command at the time, but we lost a soldier downrange, and we lost a soldier to suicide, and our battalion was, like, 2 hours away from us, right? And so that's where the chaplain was, that's where everybody was. Um, if we had not gone to the chapel there on base, we would not have had a personal relationship with the chaplain who could help us, because we had to have one. with social media and things like that, word gets around way faster. You can't like wait till tomorrow and then we'll like pull everybody in and tell them because they're all going to know by like 10 o'clock tonight, right? It doesn't work like that. And so, but he was close enough and we knew him enough to be able and trusted him to be able to come in and be what we needed him to be for our unit. And in that moment, we realized why God had put us there. And it's not what we thought it was at all. It wasn't all the programs for the kids. It wasn't a really great Sunday school class. It wasn't like we made like these fabulous connections that we've kept for like, the last 10 years. It was none of that. And yet God still had a purpose for us in that place and made it super clear in those instances as to why we needed to be there and why we needed them.
Oh, I feel like that goes so well with like the next question because I think anyone in your position might it might be so easy to lean into that and be like, I just can't find what I'm looking for.
Mm,
So we just don't connect. I think
that's
it's
right.
very easy to be like that. But God told the Israelites to live in Babylon. We talked about that before, but so to not isolate, resist, or disengage. And why is that type of instruction so countercultural?
Well, we could give all the excuses, right? I mean, you hear everybody still, "Oh, it's COVID," and I'm like, "We just need to get over that." Because I think we just struggle as a culture with stepping out there, and as much as we talk about authenticity and as much as we talk about being vulnerable, um, nobody actually wants to, unless, of course, I, like, share all of my dirty laundry on Facebook or something, you know what I mean? Unless I do that, and then that's, like, totally acceptable for whatever reason, I don't know. But that whole looking somebody in the face and being our who we are in those spaces, it can be challenging. And so sometimes I think as we get into these places, we want to pull back because it's safer, because, well, I'm just tired of doing it over and over and over over again. We talk about the Babylons, but, they only went once, and then they were there, like, 70 years, right? Then they went back, and so, like, at least they didn't move, like, every 2 or 3 years, but God calls us to do that, and it can be wearying and for us too, I talk about, well, we found our church home, and this is what God did, and we've seen His faithfulness. All of those are very true things. They are all true. It doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean that there are times where we've felt like we haven't found our place or where it's taken us, 8 or 10 months just to find where we belong in a local community. And then sometimes it's like Maryland where, even if we didn't show up, nobody would notice if we were there or not. But it wasn't about us. It was about the people that we were serving in that season, and so I think to get past that, because I get the weariness, I get the, I'd just rather stay home and watch it, watch the church I used to love in, like, other state, online because I just really like the pastor, whatever. All the things we could do, and God calls us to be courageous in stepping out, and there is no place in scripture where anybody did it by themselves. I mean, the Christian walk is one that we do together. And even if it doesn't look like we want it to, even if, it takes me forever to find my place, do it anyway because sometimes it's not for us. Sometimes it is, but it's a lesson we don't learn till later or we don't see till later. There are a multitude of reasons, but just not doing it, because I'm tired or because I just don't want to or because it's not comfortable, it's not the right answer, and, I mean, we're introverts by nature, we have to tell ourselves the same thing, like, when we visit multiple churches, when we get to a new place, we have to go back and say, "This is important, it is vitally important that we find a community of believers to belong to," and, so, um it's tempting to just stay in our little bubble, because I'm tired and I've got other things going on and I'm just weary of doing it over and over again. And I can just watch my church where I came from and I can do whatever. Um, you're going to think this is really harsh, but suck it up. God didn't call us to he didn't call us to easy. He didn't call us to comfortable. He didn't even call us to happy. He called us to obedience. And being a part of a church body is that.
Oh my goodness, yes. I think one of the things too, like, I'm starting to get there at the age where I'm, like, mentoring younger women, and so I'm like, "Okay." I'll hear certain things, and it's not without judgment, like, I've been there, I've done the things, and so,
Mm,
sometimes when you're reflecting and you're trying to share with people, it's just like, "Hey, I'm not coming to you at judgment, I'm just saying is, like, you're saying something that is eerily like the thing that I went through at a similar age, so I'm just,
yes.
like, trying to love you well in this." But I hear that so often, and I don't even know if I have a good way, even as a professional communicator. I don't know if I even have a good way of working around that in terms of communicating what I mean all the time. But I'll hear I just haven't found a community here. So it's so easy to hop online and then go visit like your home church. And that is also one of the things that I've challenged a bit in military communities that I've been, where I'm like, in that point that we're talking about intentionally living in the moment that we're in right now, of
Mhm.
like, if you keep referring to something as your home church, and I'm sure there isn't actually anything wrong, but like, I feel like psychologically, then it's so easy to be like, this isn't my home. This isn't, I don't need to like unpack. I don't need to try. I don't need to do this. If I'm uncomfortable, then I have a streaming service to go watch my church back home, and I like it. I like how the pastor preaches. I like this thing. And I just remember, especially with the church that I go to now, and we had some young ladies visit it, and our church is different. Our church is, I feel, incredibly convicted there. We have a phenomenal ministry that approaches those who have basically who are facing homelessness, housing insecurities, food insecurities. Many people have transitioned out of prison or jail communities. So when I say like it is different for me, good, it is 100%. And I mean, I remember my initial thoughts going into that church community being like, okay, I'm not used to this, you know? But then just feeling wholeheartedly so convicted. But then seeing other young women come through and it just being immediately uncomfortable, and then following that up with, "But I could just watch, my church in whatever state that you can't come from."
Right.
And I'm working through that right now, to just be like, how do I mentor and help and speak with people that I care about, to be like, hey, it might not be my church, but God
Mhm.
also might be like calling you to something, and you're deeply uncomfortable, but it's because he's trying to finesse and refine you and work through something, because we're not called to be comfortable, we're called to be challenged, we're called to grow, we're called to be the hands and feet of Christ. And it might not necessarily look like, wow, this is a perfect aesthetic social media presence for a church. It might be like, hey, we have a prison ministry and we have a homelessness ministry, and we're out there and we're in the less than ideal neighborhoods of Utah, but there's children here and we want to show them what God's love looks like. And so actively working through that right now. But I think that kind of goes right into my next question for you, in terms of, you've hosted people before the boxes were unpacked. Notoriously, my house is never unpacked, and I've been like saying like, "Oh, you got to unpack, you got to live here." It's just me. I don't unpack boxes, but I live intentionally where I'm at. But with military moves, that's a big thing. We're constantly moving, constantly changing. So why is it important to move quickly with being intentional with building community?
We find if we wait too long that it becomes long. And, one of the things like that we've done here is, I've got little postcards, like retro Florida kind of postcards. But when we get new neighbors, I put the whole welcome to the neighborhood, and then I put all of our names on it and our phone numbers and all the things. And then I go knock on their door with some cookies or something and say, hey, we just want to welcome you to the neighborhood. And I found that if I don't do that within the first couple of weeks, then it's like 3 months in and I haven't met the neighbor, haven't done on purpose. But it's the same thing for us. Like if we get to a new place and we haven't started to live here and to welcome people into our home, then it'll we start to like have, well, the next excuse and the next excuse and the next excuse. And sure enough, we're 4 months in and well, we've been too busy or well, we've been whatever. And so we've learned we're both my husband and I are very structured and we like everything in its place and we like all the things. So welcoming people into a place that feels chaotic is super uncomfortable. Like I don't love it. Like I can't find things and find you a place to sit wherever, it challenges me, but it also people become it's amazing what that invitation does for people because they don't care. what your house looks like, and I've even had them come over and they, like, help me unpack. Like, "You want me to help you unpack your kitchen?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not gonna argue with that. Like, I'll totally feed you if you, like, put those 2 boxes away." So it's had its benefits, but stepping into those places and I found that when we are and our house is not a mess on a regular basis. So true story, like if people come over, we actually like clean all the things and do all the things and that kind of stuff just because it just is. But when we've invited them in, when their box is still there and that kind of stuff, it's like it builds this bridge with them of comfort because it's like, okay, they're not putting on airs, they're not doing whatever, they're just being who they are. And we can be friends with that. And so it's a very different feeling in that space than it is when we, pull out the nicer dishes and I like actually cook something, like with real food and not that it was like frozen or something. So
I love that Corey is like, "Our house is normally ordered and structured. My house is not." So people are all coming and I'm like, "I'm so sorry. It is what it is." I
but you
love the
shouldn't
example.
apologize. I mean, I think it's part of our culture is like if somebody just shows up at my door, like I didn't invite them over and they just show up, right? Then there's a part of me that wants to be like, my office, like, gravitates my office, which is like a closet usually at our house with, like, some boxes piled up that are plain things. That's usually, like, my office. But it usually gravitates to, like, the kitchen table, right? So then and I don't, like, work in, like, neat little piles. I work in, like, piles of just have to see all the things, and I know where everything is, but I anyway, so then when people just show up, then it's like, it's stuff, right? Which can drive me crazy, but they don't care. I mean, people are they're just happy that they're there, and I think as a culture, we feel like things have to be in the right place, and, we have to be in a certain place, and it has to be a certain way in order to extend that invitation to people, and nobody cares. Like, they just want you to say, "Hey, you wanna come over?" Or when they knock on the door, you just open the door and say, "Do you want a glass of water? Because I haven't been to the grocery store in, like, 2 weeks, and I don't have anything else." Um and I might have to wash the cup before you drink out of it. But you know what I mean? It's like a whole thing. But I think we have to land in a place of we're just called to love people and there's not a formula to that. There's not a way your house has to look for that. There's not any of that. It's just you just open your door and you extend an invitation to somebody and you just love them the way they are. And then sure enough, usually they love you the way you are too.
Oh, I love that. I just think there's so much goodness in that phrasing too, and that's something that I've had to learn and accept because my mom, I love her so much, but everything had to be perfect before you hosted, and I think that really inhibited me mentally because with military moves, I'm like, "Man, I'm troubled with unpacking these boxes." I'm like, it just can feel daunting, and especially
Yes.
like I was an active duty Air Force officer, so it's like you do a full work day. The last thing you wanna do is unpack your kitchen when you get home, unless
That's
this
right.
is a horrible idea.
Kitchen's the worst,
Oh
like,
my
there's
gosh,
so
it's
many
like
little things.
there and then, like, when you do a military move, nothing fits in your next house correctly, so you're like, "Where do I put my meal prep containers?" Because there isn't a meal prep shelf like my last house had, so
It's
I'm just
like decision fatigue. You're like,
it
I've
is.
made, like, a million decisions in the last 5 minutes as to where to put something, and you're like, "I don't care. It can just go on the counter."
Yeah, exactly, and so, I mean, I've hit points where, like, actually in the recent government shutdown, I had a friend who she had a government position, so she was furloughed, and to make some money during that time, she was, like, home organizing and cleaning and stuff, and people will be like and I had hired her, and she's like, "Where do you have any specifics?" And I was like, "Anywhere. I can't do it anymore." Like, I'm like, "Whatever works, if you can help me, that would actually be the kindest thing is if I
That's
can't see it anymore." I was like, "I don't care where it is." I was like, "If you can kinda sorta make it make sense, that would be great, but, like, as long as it's gone, woo, it'd be nice."
that's right, that's all that matters. I'll find it eventually.
Exactly. I was like, "And you're a text away, and you're super nice, so I can just be like, the crap tops." Like, she'd be like, "Oh, it's over here." I'm like, "Perfect. That makes ton of sense. I love it." Yeah, no.
Kinda the relationship I have with my husband. He, like, doesn't know where half the things are in the kitchen till, like, it's time to move again. So I get that call too. "Where is, like, the garlic breads?" Anyway,
Yeah, no, you're just like, I
second
know it
drawer.
exists. Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, so we just have a few more questions left, but I've absolutely just love this topic. Um, so what would you say to military spouses or service members who just end up feeling weary? at the prospect of starting over again? How would you encourage them?
Well, I'd first encourage you to be okay with that. I actually just talked to a friend of mine the other day, and she's, they're getting ready to move again, and they thought they weren't going to move again. They thought they were going to get to stay, and there was just a weariness, and I think there was some guilt in her voice for feeling weary, like, I didn't think we were gonna do this again, and so I think understanding that I think every move is a grief process in itself, because you're leaving something behind and you have to the place where you're going to, yes, God's gonna show up, and yes, He will be faithful, and yes, there will be really, really good things in that place, but, it doesn't mean you haven't left something behind. People you love, places you've loved, church homes that have felt like family. Um, so if you're weary, if you're sad, if you're grieving the loss of those things, it's okay. It's totally okay to just sit in that for a minute. Our culture wants to get past the lamenting and get on to the woo, it's super fun, which I have a tendency to do. Full transparency. But, uh but God, there's so much in scripture where they are lamenting. They're lamenting the loss of things, and as military families, we lose a lot over and over and over again, as much as we say, "Well, we can still text or we can FaceTime or we can do whatever," it's not the same, and everybody knows. Um, so it's okay. That's the first thing. It's okay to lament that. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be weary for a season. Um, your second day in your new place, you don't have to go like meet everybody on your street. You don't have to go find a church the very first Sunday you're there. You can sleep in and you can unpack boxes and you can do all of those things. But I would challenge you if that week becomes 2 or if those 2 weeks become a month and you still haven't visited a church, you still haven't stepped out the front door of your home just to see who's out there, you haven't, gone to your unit if you're, on active duty or a spouse, either one, and gone to the unit and just met some of those people, if you haven't, said, "Hey, you wanna go to lunch?" If you haven't just started to make those steps out to just meet people, um, I would go back to the Lord and just say, "Okay, help me find what I'm here to do and help me have the desire to do so." Because, I mean, we've been married 20 years, so it's a long time, I get it, but, this is like house number 13. So it's like I get it. I get the weariness and I get the challenge, but if we stay there, if we live in that place, we miss all the things that God's doing, and you don't wanna leave the place where you are having missed what God could do.
Absolutely. And I think that I love the idea of acknowledging the weariness and acknowledging the grief that comes with it because it's completely valid. Like we're not
Mm.
going to just like wash over and we're like, we're fine, we're happy, this is great. It's like, no. Um, when I was stationed in Montana, I was a court appointed special advocate or a CASA. So you represent foster care children in the court system. And one of the things that people would talk to me all the time, and I wasn't a foster parent, I just had the privilege of representing these children. But people would say to me all the time, like, it would be so hard for me to foster because the point of fostering children is reunification with a birth parent. So they're like, to lose that relationship would just be so difficult. And my response all the time was, it's supposed to be though, because you're showing healthy attachment to a child and that it causes you grief to have that relationship change and look different. And so that child gets to witness your love for them. And that is so vitally important to be like, you are seen and loved and cherished as is. And so, similarly, even as adults or military children, or anything, when you have any kind of change in relationships or life, there's going to be natural grief. And that's healthy. That's normal and expected. And it's okay to feel those things. I mean, something was important to you in your life. That's
That's
good.
right.
That's a good thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
there was something really good that made you miss it,
absolutely.
and so that's it. That's a good thing.
Yes, it's healthy. It's how we're
Yeah,
supposed to respond.
that's right. That's
Um,
right.
okay, let's see here. In what ways has remembering people from those past assignments and maybe what has like inspired how difficult, having something worth missing, but given you courage and to build relationships in those new places?
Oh, the people. You would laugh because in our home, actually, if you walk through our home, I love furniture, like so many ways. which is not a collection that you necessarily want, full transparency, because a lot of furniture is not like a postcard, you know what I'm saying? But in every place that we've lived, we bought a piece of furniture because, Kyle and I came into marriage both having stuff, right? Because we were, late 20s, around 30, and so we had both done life before we did life together, and so there we had 2 couches and 2 blenders and 2 toasters and 2, 2 of everything, and so we chose the best of whichever one, and we went with it, and over the years, we've replaced those things, which is part of the way that we've grown as a couple too, as a married couple. It's allowed us to let go of some of those things, and I could tell you the whole story of before the 2 of us were together and what that looked like before, but so it's been a growth for us, but it's also like when we walk through our house now, we remember Korea, and we remember Pennsylvania, and we remember Kansas, and we remember, but it's not the tangible pieces have helped us to remember the people, that were in those places, and, whether they went and bought them with us or whether, they sat in our living room and enjoyed time together, whether they did whatever. Um, but remembering those people and the gift that those people are and the gift that some of them still are. We call them our family these days, but we usually pick up 1 or 2, families or couples in every place that we go, and they because they've gone from friends to family. And so we call them our family. But all of those people are people that we would have missed if we had not gone to those places. And so going to the next place is, it's like, okay, well, who are those people going to be at the next place? And trusting that God has somebody, or something in that place that will grow us and pour into us and help us along to do the next thing. But remembering that people is probably the most valuable part of being able to have courage to do whatever God's calling us to next, even in the weariest of seasons. Because looking back on all of them, there's no way I would have wanted to miss any of them. I couldn't imagine life without those people.
I love that. I think that's one of the beautiful aspects of military life is that the people and those deep
Mhm.
connections are what make it incredibly worthwhile. I literally was on Teams, Microsoft Teams, and messaging my friend. She's stationed on the East Coast, and again, from Korea, but we've known each other
Mhm.
before there too. We're actually from the same sorority, but different universities. But I was messaging her and I was like, "This is a Hail Mary kind of question." I'm like, "You likely can't answer this, but I have to try." And she got the answer for me like in a few minutes later, and I was like, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you, military.
Right.
Love you guys. You're the best." Um, Okay, so final question on this chapter, and then we'll wrap up the podcast episode. There's been so much goodness. I'm like, I could keep talking to Corey forever. Um, okay, so how can small groups, churches, or communities better recognize and send military families out into the world as missionaries?
Well, there's so many things they could do, but I think a lot of it is just recognizing the military families in their congregations, in their groups, in their whatever. And I don't think it has to be something big. Even with our church here, the conversation we have with them is it doesn't have to be a big program. You don't need the big, military ministry, although, Lord knows I love a good military ministry. But it doesn't have to look like that. And in talking to our local church here, our guidance to them is just recognize who those people are, like find them within our congregation somehow. And, whether that's like, okay, we're going to host a lunch right after worship service on Sunday morning, and, just to see who those people are, and get face and eyes on them, make sure they're connected to a small group, help them to get integrated into the church faster. Like if pastors show up, then maybe we could talk about, things that they did at their last duty station, or, things that they'd like to do. And maybe we can get them involved in the church a little bit faster. And then the other part of it was just recognize when they're leaving, because they will. And even it's teaching our churches some of these things, because I was like well, if you do that somewhere around May or June, then you'll catch most of the people leaving, because most of them move in the summer. And they're like, is that like a military thing, like you like? And I was like, yeah, like, a third of the military like moves every every summer. And I said, there are onesies and twosies that move at other times during the year, but the majority of the military community moves then. And so it's been a conversation of just helping them to recognize kind of what that rhythm looks like. And then helping them to see the value of if I pour into to this airman, which because we're at an air base, right? If I pour into this airman and challenge him and disciple him and mentor him and do all of the things, he'll go to like 5 or 6 different other places, and you know what? He'll do that with people at all of those places he goes. And so when our church is very big on missions, which is why we landed there, but if you wanna do missions, if you want to reach the world with the gospel, like, that base down the street that has, like, 18,000, service members that show up there every week, I'm like, "Those are your people," because they're gonna go everywhere from Turkey and Israel and all over the continent of Africa and all over Europe, and they're gonna go to all of those places where your denomination will never be able to send a missionary or at least acknowledge that you put one there. But these guys go, all of them, men and women, guys and like these guys, like all of those people, um, not like just male people, but all the guys, everybody goes, right? And so just helping them to understand what our military community looks like and to help them just have super simple ideas of how to integrate those people into your congregation and into the life of the church faster. And, they only have a couple of years. And, if it takes them a year just to figure out where they belong, you've missed an opportunity.
Ah, so much goodness. I've loved this conversation. Well, thank you, Corey, for sharing so much of your heart and writing this chapter. It's just been such a joy to talk to you and to learn more about your experiences moving with the military and how you're encouraging others and how these amazing church communities and just life and God's intentionality have poured into you. It's just been you're just been such a blessing to us. So the question that we're asking the authors of the chapter as we go through these podcast episodes to kind of close this out is, let me see here. What is God calling you to in this season?
I think would laugh because he's actually calling us to embrace all the things. Which I tell you to choose wisely, and I stick by that all day long. But we're within the last 6 months of the assignment here, in a job that has allowed us a broad impact on the unit Kyle's with and the community where we are. Um, and in There are still things that we long to do, before we leave, things that we really felt like were steps that we wanted to take and, to pour into folks here, and so we're trying to check all of those boxes uh, and, um, give it everything. It's like running a marathon, and so so we're trying to just, push all the way to the end and finish well is what we're trying to do, but, when we look at our calendar between here and there, it's a lot of things because it's stuff with his work, it's stuff with planting roots, we have a kid graduated from high school in May, our daughter's studying abroad right now, and, it's all these pieces, but God has really laid on my heart and Kyle's to just embrace this season, because we don't get it back. And there's no guarantee how long we get to be in the military community. There's only so much time we get with our children, and there will be a time. It might be 6 months from now where we'll intentionally take a break and step away and just maybe sleep for 2 weeks. I don't know. Do something. But between here and there, the Lord just wants us to embrace the season and all that it brings, and not miss the people that are between here and there. Not to get so busy we miss the people, but not to start to separate before it's time. To stay present and to stay intentional about the way that we finish this assignment, which can sometimes be hard. Your brain starts to go to the next thing, and then some days you're just tired of like, I feel like I've been running this for like 2 years, and you have. That's the point, right? But that's where God's calling us to right now is just to embrace this season and to finish it well and love the people on the way.
That's wonderful. So, for those listening, if you liked and appreciated that question or any of the questions that we talked about, that question specifically was from the invite event that we hosted on the Mighty app, where we have our Planning Roots app and forum. It's just this amazing fellowship opportunity and community there. So, we invite everyone to come check it out. It's just a beautiful space, and it's a great way to connect with other military affiliated Christian women from all over, not just the United States, but the globe. It was such a fun event, really cool. I got to close it out. And so to pose that question, I think it's just really unifying and fun to hear what people say. But with that, Corey, we are just about done with the podcast episode. If people enjoyed what they learned today, they want to pour into this ministry, learn more about volunteering. From your perspective as the executive director, how would you recommend they approach that?
Well, there is a lovely website with, job postings and that kind of stuff. What I would encourage you to do outside of that, because there's a lovely application on there and you can fill all the things out and we'll call and talk to you about what God's calling you to and what he wants you to do in that season, in this season, and how that balances with your family life, all the questions, right? But what I'd encourage you to do is if there are parts of planning routes that you love that kind of pique your interest or make you excited, on our website too is just our whole team. And you can find somebody from that team and just their email address is on there, and you can just say, "Hey, what does it look like to do that?" And some of our teams, some of them meet weekly, some of them meet monthly, but a couple of them have welcomed folks who are just trying to figure things out just to show up at a team meeting, just to see what that conversation looks like and to see what projects they're working on and that kind of thing. And so if you're intrigued or interested, some of those opportunities might be really helpful just to get more of an intel than just a PDF job description.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your heart, your experiences, military life with us today. I am so excited for the Invitation Project to come out in May. These podcast episodes have brought me so much joy, and it's just been so much fun to get to like hear people and learn a little bit more about them. And plus, for anyone listening, this is our executive director. She's like the big guns of our whole ministry. And so
It's a little extreme.
no, it's so
Uh,
true. It's so true. But I think it also provides us this opportunity to see your heart, to see what motivates you, to understand what really keeps you going, like what's your why behind planning roots. And I'm just really excited for everyone to check out the Invitation Project. As part of the marketing team, I've read through it so many times, and y'all, it is so life giving. It is such a joy. I'm so excited to have this project come out and for the rest of the world to see this amazing project that Planning Roots has put together. So thank you again, Corey. Thank you everyone for listening, and we hope you enjoy. Check out the Invitation Project in May.